Good afternoon, everyone. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge that I'm currently on the traditional territories of the Coast Salish. More specifically, I am currently on Beecher Bay, Siano, and Sauk Nation and Pachida Nation. So I'd like to be very thankful for all our First Nations who have been great stewards of the land and who are able to share the land with us so that we can share our passion for music and composition and the new digital era. So we can share that same joy and passion for everyone else. My name is Manar Chan. I'm the moderator for this afternoon's panel. I'm currently one of the music directors at Belmont Secondary School in Victoria, and I'm also the current president of the BC Music Educators Association. I'm very glad to be also part of the DigiMusic Council as well. So thank you very much for DigiMusic and DigiBC for the invitation. We're going to go straight into our panel for today. So panelists, in no particular order, if you would like to introduce yourself and let us know specifically about what's the most recent project you've been working on that you're allowed to talk about. Jane?
I'm going to jump in because everyone's mics are muted. My name's Jane Aurora. I'm a music producer. I work here locally in BC. I'm from Melbourne originally. I work on hip-hop projects, folk projects, roots music. And I also have a licensing company that represents 50 artists for sync for film and TV, both Canadian and Australian artists. And I'm thrilled to be working on a project presently with a young artist called Kid in PJs, who's 19. He's from San Diego. He's going to UBC here. He's a very promising young hip-hop artist and very much in the technological realm, impresses me by bringing tracks in that he's sculpted entirely on GarageBand on an iPad, which I then reframe and run through lots of tasty analog gear and add bits and pieces to and record vocals in my studio to bring it up to a really great pro level. And it's super fun.
Yes, hi. I'm Marcelo Trevino. I'm from originally from Mexico, Canadian citizen since 2005 and resident since 2001. Very proud to live in BC. I'm a composer for film, television, and I've been doing animation for maybe 10 years now. And I love doing music for animation. It's so much fun. I live in Squamish, BC. It's a little bit quieter, but they have construction outside right now, so I'm going crazy. That's just a little thing there. And I've been working on, I graduated from Berklee College of Music in 2001 from film scoring and songwriting. After that, I toured around with a band for 7 years called Panda, which is like a kind of rock pop band, punk kind of thing. And it was a great, fun rock star experience. Not for me, I was a keyboard player and arranger and producer, so I was like behind the scenes. I was much better than having to do interviews and stuff. But now I'm working on an animated show for Atomic Cartoons and Netflix called The Last Kids on Earth. And I've been doing that for maybe a year and 10 months, maybe 18 months now. And we're jumping into like an interactive one, which is going to be really interesting. And I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. And that's it. That's me. I mean, in a nutshell, like in a short.
So yeah, I'm John Morgan. Colleen and I know each other, so I just noticed her. She's on this call. And yeah, I've been in the video game industry for almost 25 years, which is kind of crazy how fast it's gone. And I started at Electronic Arts in 1996, and I just been working. I started as a composer there doing music, and was fortunate enough to start video games when they had in-house compositions instead of licensing. And so I wrote music for video games for Electronic Arts for quite a few years, especially the game like SSX and Tricky were some of my early games. And then now I'm at this point, I'm the audio director for the Coalition Studios, which is a Microsoft studio, and we make Gears of War. So, and that's what I generally work on is Gears of War, but I also work on a lot of other projects within Microsoft and just deal with all things audio and music. So that's me.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
We'll start off with a broad question for the three panelists, and whoever wants to jump in first, please do so. So let's actually talk about your journey. Did you always did you always know that you wanted to work in sound or music? And the follow-up question is, what was the first job that actually kickstarted your career?
Um, I started as many of us did, like playing a guitar or a piano and trying to be in a band and kind of getting into that everyday playing with your friends kind of thing. And then it got a little bit more serious. And then in high school, I was part of all the music club kind of musician pit, musicians playing for the musical theater stuff. So I kind of started to arrange and then became a director. And so I kind of started to feel like it was going to be a more serious approach to working on music. I really liked it. My parents have always encouraged it and are very musical themselves. And then it started to get a little bit more serious, and I looked into going to college for it. And once I was there, an intro to film scoring class just blew me away because I merged the whole experience of me as a kid watching Star Wars and all that stuff. And it was just like, this is amazing if I can do both things. But I was also doing a bunch of songwriting, so I kind of did a dual major in that. And then after that, I think one of the first projects, and I recommend this to a lot of people who I talk to, is our students who were doing I went back to Mexico, and some students were doing projects for school, and I started doing like TV series. They became producers, and I started working with them, and then this whole immigrating to my family to Canada thing came up in 2001. That was a whole shift of what was going to go on in my life, and I chose Toronto at first. I worked in Toronto for a bit, went back to Mexico, started to tour with the band, but I missed scoring for TV and films. I did a bunch of films and little things on the side. And then it started to dawn on me that it was fun to be touring and stuff, but I missed writing for picture. And I decided Vancouver was a great place to be. So I got married, which is another story. And then I moved, convinced everyone to give it a chance to go to Vancouver. And that was 2012, and I've been up here starting to do little projects, mostly animation. That was actually my final project for film scoring at Berkeley, was an animated clip. So it kind of everything came back full circle in a way after being away and playing, and I just fell in love with going that route. And I guess I did a show for Disney in Disney India, which was my first animated show, and it was a crazy schedule because they're on the other side of the world and stuff. And I guess that was a project that I worked with Brian Carson, a composer, great composer and mentor friend here, for 4 years on a show for Disney. And I think that was like my little master in animation, writing for animation music master course, mentorship slash thing. And it was an amazing thing to be working with him. And then I did my own show, and then I kind of went from there. And I just love being here in BC, and the community here is great, and everybody's kind of working at a really cool pro level, and I'm always learning, and I'm always trying to learn more about this industry, and I love being part of the animation music part of it. Does that make any sense? I don't know. I just kind of rambled for a little bit.
No,
Is that my life? Yeah, no worries.
Rambling's great. Thank you, Marcelo. Thank you so much for sharing.
No problem.
John, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I mean, sure. Yeah. So I think like for me, like when I was in high school, like I played piano as a kid and played in a high school band. I played saxophone and probably was in like a lot of similar shoes as many of you, like just and so in the 80s, this was in the 80s, synthesizers and things were kind of coming into, music, and I liked electronic music. I liked like Howard Jones and, the 80s electronic. And so I really just thought like, playing a synthesizer was really kind of fun. And so I saved my money up and bought my first synthesizer, like a Korg Poly 800, and played in a band, and one thing led to another, and next thing you know, I was playing in keyboard bands, like in the 80s, and that was kind of what really got me into it. It was just like the music, like I was just into the music, and that was my instrument, and so I think like you know, most people, I didn't really expect to be making a living at it. I just did it because I liked it. And, you know, one thing leads to another, and it sort of snowballs, and you meet people and you play in different bands and you do different things. And next thing you know, you're working on something that, you know, and for me, there was like touring with bands, and then realizing that maybe I could get a job at Electronic Arts, I think was eventually when I sort of realized I could kind of put it all together. But I think, you know, so that was kind of the way it started for me. It was probably very organic, and probably the way it starts for most people is that just your love of music and your passion to make music and electronic music. So, you know, and then back in the 80s and 90s, it wasn't like DAWs and computers. It was much more like hardware sequencers and drum machines and things like that. So, but yeah, that's how I got into it. Just doing what I like to do.
Thanks, John. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
And Jane.
Yeah, like the guys, I've been passionate about music since I was young. I started playing guitar when I was around about 10, and playing shows from 13 or 14, pretty young, and touring around Australia into the latter part of my teens, as well as teaching guitar and bass, which was big for me because throughout my career, there's always been a thread of working with young people. And as I was lucky enough to expand into touring different parts of the world with my band and as a session player in India, in East Timor, Europe, North America, I had 8 years of my life with no fixed address, which is something that's wild to think about right now, as we're all static for one of the first times in human history. It was exhausting after a time, at the same time as being really fun. But because of being open to saying yes to such broad experiences with that travel and tour, it enabled me to create a really interesting phase of my life beyond the age 30, where I became a music producer, because I was used to working with diverse groups of people, mentorship, bringing out the best in people, and also using technology in different applications. Like when we were touring in India in the early 2000s, there'd hardly been any gigs there at that stage. And so as a band, we were often helping sort of front a house setup and do a lot of the tech, as well as playing when people were experiencing rock concerts for the first time in remote locations. And then that translates really well to problem solving sometimes, because of, you know, the scope of what you're looking at in those unique situations. I was also lucky to work on Indigenous communities in Central Australia on hip hop projects for about 10 years from my early 20s. And that's where I learned my recording chops that allowed me to become a producer in a more formal context now, where I produce for artists, for labels, as well as do some stuff for film. But if I hadn't spent 10 years where I was doing 3 months a year in a hot tin shed, like pinning carpets to the walls and using very minimal gear to do some pretty renegade productions with some youth with amazing stories to tell right there in Central Australia, then I wouldn't have the skill set that now allows me to interface with and connect a lot of the cool projects that are happening in the city of Vancouver. And just like Marcelo was saying, Vancouver is such a great place to be. It's very progressive. We've got the meeting of tech and music. We've got beautiful nature around us, but also like a very inspired, collaborative, creative community. And I've been lucky enough to really flourish in my work since moving here. And I created something called Producers Lounge, which is for women and non-binary producers, of whom there are a few, you know, in Canada and around the world. It's less than 5% are women or non-binary. And we've been lucky enough to work in big spaces in the city like Warehouse Studios and Monarch, and have guests like Sylvia Massey, who's recorded Prince and Tool and Johnny Cash, come in. And then last year I also was able to interview Wendy and Lisa from Prince's band The Revolution as part of Vancouver International Film Festival. And there's lots of really cool opportunities for diversifying the music scene in this city going on at the moment. And I'm really proud to be a part of all of those. And it's exciting times for young people coming up, because I think there's more opportunities in this city than many cities in the world.
Thank you so much for all three talking about your journey. Sorry to put up my teacher hat on right now. Those participants who are listening, there's so much about life that you learn along the way that's not necessarily always in a traditional classroom sense. And this is coming from a teacher. So I hope you take away, one of the big takeaways is through experience. Jane, while you're up, the first question is for you. In your website bio on Arrival Sounds, it says you have a unique approach to music production. What are your methods to get the creative process rolling when you're working with artists to produce music, especially new artists?
Well, it's always a little bit genre specific in terms of how things are going to go, and depends on how the idea comes in. If someone's super creative, like Tage, who I've been talking about, Kid and PJs, whose EP I'm working on at the moment, then I'm really trying to sculpt and work with an idea without influencing it too much, because it's very well formed, and just to enhance it. But if there are issues, say when someone's wanting to do hip hop and they don't have a good start point, can do something as simple as starting with someone's journal and working with rhyme structures, creating beats, pulling out an 808. I like putting hands on tactile things as well as just the iPad, being able to sort of draw on loop sounds, maybe a microKORG, if anyone's familiar. It's got lots of great presets in to kick things off, and then to get a loop moving and to try and formulate a chorus and to work on a theme, but just generally to keep it exciting from the get-go. And mostly, I think one of the most important things about getting songs out quickly for beginning artists is not to bring the editor hat in too early. So you don't want to just jump on a critique at the outset of someone's idea. So it's like trying to make as much flow happen as possible and get and extrapolate as much as you can, and then work on refining that later, whether it's me as a producer or, you know, young music writers at home watching this now. I think it's really important, if you're in a state of flow, to not cut that off. And that's something you often have when you're young and confident and you haven't had lots of knockbacks from the industry. It's like, while you have that tap on free flow, let it all come out. And then once it's all come out, work out how to enhance that. And something that I am particularly good at is working with people's vocal abilities of varying degrees, to like come in and look at whether the pronunciation of words is working, phrases, and tidying that up. Because to make a good saleable pop song, it really is always going to be vocals that's the most important in that scenario. Not for always for gaming music, but like, I think, yeah, it can be very creative to let it all come out and then work out the exact moment when it's time to trim and tidy and shape it into something beautiful.
Next question goes to Marcelo. How did you get involved in scoring the music for The Last Kids on Earth? And what research and processes went into the scoring for an animated show? And is it different composing for an animated series than an animated film?
Okay, yes, super different. I started meeting people here in Vancouver from the animation industry, and there was this. This is a really cool story. There was this show that was licensed by Atomic Cartoons way back about a mariachi zombie. Not kidding. A super cool project that I think got like lost in the noise of transitioning and projects, and I really don't know what happened. But I did a demo for it, and I recorded like a real mariachi in Mexico City because I was there for a weekend. So I actually got a mariachi in like a studio, and we recorded all these songs. And I was so excited because I'm like, I'm from Mexico, so this should be like a shoe-in thing, right? I know mariachi, and it's like an animated. I've done animation for a while, so I did demo for that show, and I was like writing emails, and I gave my demo, and I had help trying to get to the people who were doing the show, and it was such a fun experience. But then the show kind of got in limbo, stayed in limbo, and years later, I saw a press release about The Last Kids on Earth. And I said, I've sent them a demo before. Like, they kind of know who I am, maybe not, I don't know. So I sent an email. I was like, this show looks amazing. Could I please do like a demo? It would be really amazing if I could send a demo. And they're like, yeah, sure. It's going to be a while before we get to that stage, but yeah, of course. So I started reading the books, and I marked, and I went through them, and I kind of just which are the monsters, and I kind of got like into the demo frenzy of let me kind of see if I can world build this little demo before I send anything. So I was doing that for a couple months until they told me, you know what, I think it's time to do like a little scene. So I then jumped into the audition submission, which composers do for shows, and I kind of sent in and crossed my fingers, and I got a little bit of feedback, and then the conversation went on a little bit about we like what you're doing, let's try this. And then out of the blue, they're like, would you come in for a little meeting? And they gave me the good news, and then I acted all cool and aloof. But then I went outside and I started jumping around, And because it's such a cool project, it's got like monsters and zombies, and it's comedy, and then we jump from the 80s stuff to 90s stuff. So I was like beside myself, and we had a little party here at home, and I started working on that, and I kind of just dove into it like head first, and I built a template just for the show with like some sounds that I thought would work for the show. And in it, you do have to kind of work really fast because we get like a week and a half per episode. So you have to be prepped up for that in relation to an animation feature, which you have maybe a couple months, and then you can kind of prep for that, and then stuff starts coming in. So the scheduling is a little bit different, but I think just in general, the speed of an animated series is much faster. I think sometimes the animated features, you have to kind of get in there and move stuff around, but it's after doing so many episodes of 22 minutes and stuff, doing a feature, it's like doing 3 episodes, and you have more time, so it kind of feels you can kind of go into it a little bit deeper. And yeah, that's kind of my experience with an animated feature and the show. And for this show, I had a little bit of I did some recording of we put 10 drummers in one room together in Monterrey, Mexico, and we could just bang loops, and we had so much like audio that I still use, and I loop in there and stuff. So we did a lot of cool stuff before I actually started writing for the show. And the producer, everybody were really like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "No, it's gonna be fine." So I thank them for kind of trusting and also shaping the mood and stuff. So we've been working together, and the cast, the voice talent is so cool that you kind of laugh by yourself here. You probably have, you guys who work on music, you're laughing by yourself that it's so cool, and then that inspires you to do. So it's a kind of a mesh of everything, and you kind of evolve also with the show as it evolves. And I try to look at the material in the books and then the scripts as much as I can. But then once you get the visuals, it changes the mood. So that's kind of the overall vibe for The Last Kids. I don't know. I think that's super specific, but yeah. Yes.
Did you mic up all of those drum kits individually, or was it one room mic? I've got to ask a tech question.
No, it was amazing. We can talk about that some more time. But we put like we had one basic kick for one drum, and then we have two mics for each drum set, and then we had some room mics in the center, and we had 10 drummers, and it was epic drumming all the time, and we did loops, and we did patterns for one of the monsters, and it wasn't like a really cool experience. Plus, some of the drummers there were like, we don't know what we're doing, but let's do this. Someone like, they're all like with their own brands, like the Yamaha, and like they're really cool. Like they tour all over the world. But it was right before New Year, so everybody was like at home. So we flew in. We were like 30 musicians recording for a Last Kid session in a week. We also got 6 guitars and 3 basses in one room, and recorded a bunch of like big chords. And so all that stuff I kind of blend in there, and it does give the show a little bit of its own thing. And I'll tell you more about that session later. But it was such a cool thing to do. I want to do it again, but there hasn't been any time, so we're waiting to see if we can do more seasons, and then I can go into the studio again. Now with COVID, now everybody's at home, and most of the musicians that worked on the show, we did a little WhatsApp group, and we kept in touch. Everybody's out of a job now. Like they were touring, and they were recording sessions and stuff. So what I did is that we did a little system where I send out. We've done this for 6 episodes now, where I send out little clips, and they record stuff at home. And so I've been kind of adding more live elements to book 3 of the show that isn't out yet. And I think it's helped the music of the show a lot, but also the musicians, they get a little mini gig thing. So we've been trying to do that also to support them, because everything stopped for them. And since we were fortunate enough, and everybody at Atomic Cartoons did like an amazing job of switching the production to home-based production, so the show kind of survived a little bit, I think. I don't know the full story, but it kept going, and some shows shut down, and so I don't know. So I was very lucky to still have a job, and so we started this little kind of remote recording network for the Last Kids, and they've been sending me a bunch of guitars and stuff. And I wish I would have done that with book 1 and book 2, because it sounds so cool, but everything's so fast that it's tough to. But with COVID, it kind of forced into let's help each other out, and it forced us to do a little network thing where we can upload and download files, and we figured that out. You know, we got a good system going for remote musician recording. I went off the trail, but that's kind of yes.
That's okay. It actually gave us a nice insight on how, lack of a better term, how analog technologies still place so much into digital technologies, especially for music composition. So that's fantastic. Next question is for John. So you have various audio credits from composer to sound design in many notable franchises like Gears of War, Mass Effect, and SS Tricky, to name a few. What are some key differences between sound design and music design, and what are your favorite aspects of each?
Yeah, good question. So, sound design and music design, I would say more than ever now, are starting to blend a lot more. Like, especially in a game like Gears of War, there's a lot of soundscapes and ambiences that are sort of somewhat musical, but not really. And when we start a project working with a composer, we do compose themes and songs specifically for cinematics and various moments in the game. And of course, music is really all about the emotion and the mood. I mean, in games, that's the primary purpose of music, is to put you in a mood or bring out some emotion in the gameplay, or move you through something faster or whatever you want to happen. So I think like music is very much about the feel and the mood, and sound design's very much about gameplay. But again, like they do sort of mix together a little bit. So part of the projects when I work on with a composer is to actually work on structured themes and songs, but also to work on like ambiences and various like emotional soundscapes that sort of blend the music and sort of the sort of sound of the world that you're creating a little bit more. And then sound design, on the other hand, has very specific things it needs to do. Like if you shoot a weapon, it needs to make a weapon sound. If a grenade blows up, it needs to make an explosion sound. But at the same time, those gameplay sounds also can be musical. And so, we want to make sure that they fit in with the score and they don't stand out, and it all sort of blends seamlessly together. So yeah, that's the type of stuff that we work on in the start of a project. And when we do our prototyping and our original sort of visual and audio concepts, that we play with those ideas. And I was going to say the last part of what are my favorite aspects of each. Yeah. I really, working on music now, I actually don't get to write a lot of music for games anymore. So I really love doing that if I'm given the chance to. But working with the composer on the music project is always, super fun. Obviously, with Gears of War, we've worked with recently with Ramin Djawadi, who's a Game of Thrones composer, and he's quite renowned, Westworld and other movies. So it was great to work with him, obviously, to see his workflow and how he creatively writes music, and the professionalism, and working with his team and everything. So that's super exciting. It's really fun stuff. And I'm, super, I just, every day I pinch myself that sometimes I'm working in that situation, obviously recording with him at Sony Pictures and various like studios like Skywalker Sound and such is always like massive thrill to do. But on the other hand, sound design is kind of like, it's also pretty fun, like working with my sound designers to design monster sounds or various sounds that are required, especially like really unique stuff, like where you're making something like fresh, and again, like it's getting that fresh material, like a recording or something that you can use to craft into Monster. You know, we do a lot of recording sessions, like we record animals and seals, and we record all sorts of different things so that we can, you know, have that source, like Marcelo was saying, to work from and sort of fashion something out of that source with plugins and things to make, you know, the sounds that we make. So that's also really fun stuff. It's, you know, they're very different disciplines, but they do merge a little bit, but you know, they're both equally fun things to do. So
Thank you for that. I think one of my favorite parts of teaching music composition to my students is actually introducing them to Foley, and how do you create sound effects when there's no sound effects for, you know, a monster step who's, you know, in the marsh. How do you do that? So it's a really really great technique with the sound design and everything. So thank you so much for talking about that. This is now an overhead question for all three. What has been the most notable change in the industry from when you first started to now, and how have you adapted to that change? And if you want to talk even COVID now, this is a, you know, good thing to speak about as well. So whoever would like to jump in for that.
I'll start. Maybe I'll start reverse order here. I mean, I really feel like, and I do tell kids and students this, like, you know, obviously most people have grown up in a digital world. When I started, it was more of an analog changing into digital world. And so things are completely different. I mean, we were recording on tape and reel to reel, and like, you know, there was no DAWs, and all of that stuff sort of happened throughout my career. And I really feel, you know, and it is still happening, like the things that we're seeing in technology with plugins and soft synths and various, like, you know, virtual studios and everything now just in your box on your laptop. I mean, all of this stuff is still changing, but I think in audio that's something you'll always sort of live with. But I think we were really lucky to be part of the only generation in time that sort of bridged the gap between analog and digital. And that is something that'll never happen again. And that was something that's just happened, and some people were a part of that. So fortunately, you know, if you still play vinyl records or you still do analog stuff, yeah, you still have access to it. In 20, 30, 40 years, maybe that stuff won't be around anymore. So we're really lucky to have lived through that generation. But in general, as an audio person working in games, like, you know, technology every 5 years is almost completely different than it was 5 years ago.
I think that's something that I also went through with analog to digital. That's something that's really had an impact on how you actually send something out. And right now I'm still connecting cables, and why do I get this buzz? So there's a part of being in the audio and composer business. You also have to be working on your skills as your computer and your gear and your right now. As composers, we're transitioning from having computers that are networked, and they send audio in MIDI, and so you can load your instruments on one side, and then because processing power, and so we're transitioning in that sense, where our rigs are going in from multi-computer into a one computer. Well, a lot of people already jumped to the one computer system, but for a long time there was like a multi. I jumped this year into having like a PC network computer that helps me host all my instruments. So we're still transitioning in detail a little bit in how we get faster to our end product. And for me, I think one of the things that I'm most thinking about nowadays that has changed in the landscape is social media, and the fact that you have to take that much into consideration in regarding your career as an artist, or as a recording artist, or as a composer, or as a teacher, or working in the audio business, and we're kind of faced with this idea that now we have to have our own products, and we have to have our own brand and our own presence, and we have to be creating content and communicating our experiences, and it kind of, different composers, different artists are built, I think, in different ways. So not everybody kind of fits that mold, and I think there's a pressure in a way to kind of feel that you have to be doing all these activities that do help, I think, in a way, and that's kind of how new composers are being brought up. They have all these outlets where they can share their music, where they can tell people what they're doing. They can interest producers or directors and put up some files online. And now we have faster ways of getting to a track because we have all these DAWs that you can just fire up and get ready. And there's so many resources on YouTube where you can learn all this stuff. So this whole, I would call it like a content avalanche kind of, it is something that we've been facing for the last 5, 6, 7 years that we kind of feel as composers that we need to kind of have a foot in. Streaming your own stuff, which I think I like to do. I'm trying to get into the whole Twitch thing. So that's a shift in the way we as composers not have to think about it, but it does. There is this kind of sense that we have to be present, and it can get tiring, maybe mentally or physically, that there's so much information out there. So it's a balance, right? So finding your own voice as an artist, even as you're starting as a student, what are you sharing? What are you doing? What are you learning? Where are you headed? And how much of that are you going to be sharing? And is that a positive thing towards your end goal, your career? Can be a little bit overwhelming. So I just think that that's something that we're facing right now, and it's a good thing to look at and not be as stressed by as some people could get stressed by, because it's so much information right there. Plus, we're living in a very difficult, weird situation time in the world right now. So I think that's mostly what I've been thinking about. That's a big career shift. Like, how do I brand myself? How do I post my information out there? How do I share? How do I get new projects? Because the paradigm has been shifted a little bit, I think. I don't know.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? I don't know.
Absolutely. I'll continue on from there a little bit too. I think, like, ultimately for all the students watching who have probably had smartphones for, since they were about 10, and that didn't come into my life till I was in my late 20s. It's an interesting era in terms of COVID occurring and our isolation happening now, because we're already equipped with a lot of technologies to do things like this meeting, which just wouldn't have even, been dreamed up in the late 80s. When I started recording, we were using 4-track machines. When I toured, we sold physical copies of CDs. That used to be how we'd make the extra money, extra $1,000 after a show would be all those merchant CD sales. And now when I'm working with artists, we're very much focused on trying to get 1 million Spotify plays and get on a playlist. And I think young people are more equipped than those of us speaking to engage with those technologies. And it's an exciting time because really it's quite democratic in some ways. If you make really good art and do a good job of putting it out there on the internet, it doesn't matter if you've got a big company behind you anymore. Whereas in the 90s and early 2000s, you needed a big record label behind you. Obviously, that helps you get traction because of the advertising that they pay for. But if you do something incredible and post it to YouTube, you may end up with a couple million people looking at it if you do it the right way. So just dedication and focus on the craft, I think, really transcends a lot of barriers that used to be there when we were operating in a more analog environment. So really the possibilities are pretty endless in terms of connecting to anyone in the world now. Though that wasn't possible before. You can DM people on Instagram, some of your heroes, and see if they're going to listen to your beats, if it's any good. You can approach a composer in that very direct way. It didn't used to be so open book in terms of how you could access people in the world. So that's been a major shift, since things started out for me.
Thank you. Along the same lines, what struggles or challenges have given you your biggest career lesson, and what lesson is that? And this is open to all three.
I was a ripping guitar player for years, and I was on the road, and we would be up till 2 a.m. catching airplanes. Not super healthy lifestyle, always the rock and roll lifestyle, and I ended up with tendonitis really badly when I was about 30 and lost some of my fast technical playing ability. It was about 2010, a little bit after that. But because of losing my superstar skill, the one thing I was doing, it forced me to branch out and do many more things. And if I didn't have the hand injury, I would never have become a music producer. So I guess that's a good element of understanding how you can pivot even in an adverse situation when you think you've got your entire identity associated with something. because of all of the diverse career experience I had, I was able to reshape and reprogram my career to becoming a producer, which has ultimately been really rewarding for the last 10 years and allowed me to do much more diverse stuff, collaborate, and be more open-minded than when I was just doing my solo music project.
Yeah, I'll go quickly. I mean, in games, we're always, everyone's always worried about what is their next career move or their next game. And I think I don't know anyone who hasn't been through like an industry layoff or something like that. And I think when you first have one in games, you realize like, wait a second, like it's not really like about the company anymore. It's about like you take away your learnings and you still have value. And so as long as you stay true to yourself and try to be who you are, most people I know just end up finding work relatively quickly after that. So I think that's always a big thing in the games industry when you get your first layoff, is that you have to sort of pick up the pieces and go, wait a second, I'm still really good, and people want to do, people want this, and to get back on your feet and get back into the industry. So yeah, that's kind of a common thing that we have in our industry.
I guess I super agree with the whole getting off a project and seeing your life, where your life is gonna take you. For me, just to change the channel from the industry, because there's so many challenges in the industry. You start learning about new things, new goals, and then what you have to do to get to that goal. But changing a little bit from that perspective, for me, a challenge. I became a dad in 2012, and then I became a dad 2 years later, and then I became a dad 2 years later, and so there was 5 of us now, and it's the super coolest thing ever. But what I kind of find as a challenge nowadays is kind of to structure and balance the time and the energy and the just the mood and the your scheduling and everything, kind of your life, the typical, everybody talks about like life work balance. I think that's one of the challenges that for many years I was like in downtown Vancouver with like a solarium, and I had my stuff in the solarium, and I was like all like crunched up, and I had a baby crying in the background, and then I was doing an episode where there was a baby crying because he was like transforming into like so I had like 2 babies crying, like one in the show at 4 a.m, and then another real baby. So that's kind of I've kind of have to learn how to balance those things, and maybe that happens as you just graduate. Maybe you have to find like, how much time am I going to spend with my friends versus how much time I'm going to develop my craft so that I get a good internship, or I get a good project going, or I get my brand going, or my sound online, and I get share my tracks. Or so there's always a little finding a balance between what you're doing in your like personal stuff and your audio composing, being an artist, part of it, and it never stops. I think. I mean, I don't know if when my kids go off to college, I'll still be worried about what they're doing. So there's still a balance there at all times, and also like financially, like how much do you spend on whatever. So I think that's one of the challenges that I'm like addressing constantly and trying to get better at.
Another question for all three, and I get this all the time as a music teacher. What is your favorite instrument or tool to compose with, and why?
When I tell people that my instrument is the computer, they look away, like they give that emoticon, like looking up kind of, I think. And to be honest, that's what like I focused. I play piano, I play guitar. I studied at Berkeley. My main instrument was voice back then, so I can sing a little bit. But to be honest, what I kind of focus on getting better at is the DAW part of it. And if you see it as an instrument, you have to kind of know how to navigate and kind of move around and filter stuff and mix. And so I do think it's important to start to look at it as kind of an instrument. So that's kind of mine.
I'm going to go the opposite angle to this, even though I predominantly use a computer in a lot of my productions. But to get ideas started, it can be really nice to have hands-on tools, like we were admiring the Juno behind John there and things like that. But the microcorg is like a really affordable analog and digi keyboard that probably any of you all could get your hands on for about $300, that has so many great presets and really handy filters that makes you feel like you're a synth specialist, just even when you don't really have any keyboard skills, someone like me. But it's great to get projects going with tactile things as well sometimes. And sometimes the choices are too many on the computer. Like I think I've got 17,000 plugins or something. I don't know how they all work. So it's great to come into a session sometimes and just put your hands on a drum machine. I've got a little TR-08, which is a little bit like the 808 drum machine that's so famous from all the hip hop stuff from the 80s and 90s. And you can immediately just kind of dial up stuff and start playing with things that might take you on a different trip too, if you're sitting there looking at this huge list of VSTs and you don't know which one to open up.
Yeah, similar. I like to get things going with like drum machines and keyboards and stuff like that. So yeah, I think like when that's me, but I mean, working with composers, I know a lot of them boil it right down to piano. And I think like, you know, just an analog piano or a keyboard with a piano sound, just to get the themes down, you know, like, because most good themes you can play on a piano, and just like, you know, just to get those notes, like get the kind of the bass theme and the notes down. And then once you have those, you can do whatever you want with it. You can make it synthy and whatever. You can like, you know, take it in so many directions. But I think if you're just starting writing and you're looking for themes and melody, piano is a great place to start.
Again, teacher hat on for those participants in the room. If this is the realm you want to go down, guitar or piano are your two biggest and easiest instruments to get started, to wrap your head around for composition, because you can do a melody and accompaniment. You can't do that on a clarinet or a trumpet. I've tried. So stick to piano and guitar and just get your basics around understanding of those, and your life will be that much simpler as you get along in the industry. Okay, last of the preset questions. I know there's a few in the chat. What is one piece of practical advice you would give to someone starting out or seeking to work in this industry? Maybe your younger self. What's one piece of advice that you would give?
I think for me, looking back, maybe the younger self part of it, I think, well, in my case, I was a bit impatient, I guess. I kind of wish that I was like, it's gonna work out, keep doing what you're doing, and try to network with your friends who are doing projects. Just send them stuff. It was a little bit more difficult to make your stuff heard back when I was younger. So I think right now it's a really cool time to be able to share, to send somebody a message, be like, I'm interested in working on your project, and most importantly, just try to build your own voice in your own artist part of it, your own audio part of it. I know it sounds like an impossible thing to do, but after a while you start like recognizing, oh, that's kind of what I do. That's kind of my voice. It's kind of, and people like that, and it's good that you work with people who like their own voice, and it takes a while, and patience. Going back to my first thing, a little bit of patience on that end, and consistency, I think.
Yeah, I think I can also echo that sentiment. Finding your own unique voice and putting as much time into cultivating your art, and these days we call it making content, while you're still living at home, because finding enough time to get really good at what you're doing, especially working in a digital environment with DAWs and all of these different options. It's a lot of skills development to do, and then a lot of creative play, and that can be more challenging if you're going to college or if you're out there trying to work another job. I know I was very lucky that I taught guitar while I was still living at home, and that allowed for me to save, to buy equipment, and to really kind of build myself before I hopped out into the adult world. So the more you can do now while your time is your own, the easier things are going to be when you fly the nest.
Yeah, for sure. And I would say, like, you know, just echoing those statements, like stay true to yourself and be, you know, keep at it. A lot of people just, you know, they sometimes they give up, or I think if you're doing something you love, it's pretty easy to keep at it. But of course, obviously, like money and finances and everything come into play too. And one thing I also thought, you know, which was back in my younger years, is surrounding yourself with people that are doing something that, like, they're either where you want to be or sort of going there. And there's a lot of ways to do that. Like you know, even like, for instance, there's like studio spaces like greenhouse studios and things like that, where there's a lot of people with composer rooms and things happening there, where you're putting yourself into like an environment where people are creating and working together and going maybe the same place you are. So I really find like surrounding yourself with people that are like-minded and potentially going the direction you want to go really, really helps. Like a good example is, you know, with a lot of the people that have worked with Hans Zimmer at Remote Control, a lot of them actually just kind of went there and showed up at the door and said, look, like, I want to work for you and be a like anything, I'll get coffee and, you know, and do that. And they've slowly worked their way into becoming someone that's on their composing team. So I think like there's lots of ways to do that, and surrounding yourself with like the environment to succeed is really important too. So
Thank you. Great advice. Absolutely great advice. I echo Marcello's when he talked about relationships. I teach composition here at Belmont. I'm not very good at it, not gonna lie. I understand the basics of it. I love certain easy apps that Apple has made because it works for me. But keeping those relationships, I have two friends in the industry, one who's on the gaming side, but she was working on Halo and introduced me to the Sprint. And that's how I learned about how much composition was happening for video games. And this was at a time where it wasn't as big yet. And that kind of sparked a lot of interest in me in learning more. And then that kind of led me towards DigiBC. So you never know who in your realm of friends is going to be in the same industry as you. And even if you just keep in contact with them through Instagram, at least it's some contact with them. So I think that's the biggest takeaway, because you never know who you're going to work with and all that sort of stuff. So thank you. We now have some questions from the chat. So I will go in chronological order. Brenda's first question here is really interesting about the democratization of art. Are we seeing any increase of diversity in the music world regarding animation and video games? And that's a general one for everyone.
Yeah, I'll just jump in really quick. Like, I think diversity is a really big topic these days in video games, and you know, having representation for everybody, and, you know, being conscious of all sorts of people's abilities and you know, thoughts on, you know, game styles and such. So I think, like, you know, with Microsoft, we have committees and teams and strike teams and things like going internally to help, you know, foster those ideas and make sure that everybody's thinking about all angles of diversity and gender when making games. Like Gears of War, for instance, our lead character, Kate, in the series was female, and a lot, you know, that's not too uncommon nowadays to have a female lead, but it was really uncommon like 10 years ago. It was quite a bit more less common. And then there's other games exploring you know, gender diversity, like The Last of Us 2 is a really good example of a game that just came out. So I think like that's a really hot topic and something that we feel really strongly about supporting, you know, play for everybody. So, and that's super important to us. So, because I mean, you know, the stereotypical video game culture of it being a really male dominated and, you know, geared towards a very, you know, small sector audience of teenage boys or whatever, is that we're trying to move as far away from that now as we can. So it's a super big topic.
Yeah, it seems like it's changing on a much more kind of startup level. Some of the programs I've been involved in town, like with Producers Lounge, Lynn Gardner works for Relic, and she's pretty amazing with audio. And we're starting to run more workshops to encourage more women and non-binary identifying people into composition world. And as for people playing games, it's so diverse now. So many people are playing them on a handset. It is an obvious time of change and accessibility. But in terms of the content makers, there is action in this city to support more women, non-binary people, and people from diverse cultural backgrounds into doing that, so that things are just more interesting.
Yeah, there's the Composer Diversity Collective, which I recently learned about a few months ago. So I'm still researching it and hope to be part of that. And so I think it's a good topic to be in the forefront right now for composers and people in the audio industry. I don't know. I'm still learning.
Yeah, it is definitely being addressed in BC and Vancouver more than other parts of the world. When Wendy and Lisa were up here from Prince's band, The Revolution, they were stunned to see how much support and hope there was to grow things. But ultimately, for women and non-binary folks, we're still looking at only 5% of those working professionally being in that category. So there's some work to do there in supporting people up and coming, but there is a commitment to it in the province we're in. So we're lucky.
The commitment, yes.
Yeah. Representation matters, and social justice and music has always been hand in hand throughout history. So it's definitely a very important relationship we have. Another question we have for all three panelists: what are the rights I have to music composed for games and animation?
In my case, you negotiate your composing rights with a publishing company. Some of the publishers share, and then the writers share. And then you negotiate that with the production company or the broadcaster, and so you kind of have to see where your rights are going.
But if you're starting up at home on a more basic level of getting your catalog together and you've created all of the music and made the recording, you absolutely outright own that material, and don't let anyone else tell you otherwise. Yeah.
And in games, it's a little different because we don't have back-end royalties. So quite often there's like one-time buyouts or full buyouts, which is really common in games because there's no way for artists to recoup money after that. So in television and film, you would get royalties on the back end. In games, that doesn't exist. So there's more of a situation where you're having a full buyout for that particular game. So 100% you still own the rights to the music, but the companies will do a buyout for, a blanket use on that game in any way they want for that particular product, and you'll sign that contract. And usually the upfront pay is much more significant than it would be in television.
How do you network and find projects?
I would say, given the current environment with COVID and digital environment that we were just talking about, that online is definitely your best bet at this moment in time. And there are often really cool forums where you can meet people, different groups as part of Insta and Facebook. But it's also cool to attend conferences if you've got the chance. Like before COVID, obviously in person, and now there's lots of great online panels like this happening where you can meet people and advance your career just by saying hey and maybe sending the material afterwards.
I agree. That's kind of super great answer. I sent a bunch of emails.
Yeah.
Endless emails, and maybe send 200 emails and only get one response. Don't be discouraged. Keep going.
Yeah, exactly. Just keep at it. I think like for me too, like with music and sound designers, I do see a lot of resumes and demo reels and things like that come my way. Demo reels, and I'm always willing to give feedback on it. Like I actually try to listen to them all and offer people feedback and try to steer them in the right direction. If I know of something going on, I'll tip them off to something. I've met many people for coffees. So I think exactly right. Like, just like Jane said, like attending things like this and meeting people that have an insight in the industry and just helping them, make aware that you're there and listen to your music. One of the best stories, I love this story because I one of my friends, Adam Lestuka, used to work at Tom Lee Music, and he was selling keyboards in the keyboard department. And I talked to him quite a bit, and I was like, why are you doing this? And he's like, because all the composers in town actually come into my store. And so he actually just kept giving them CDs and demos and back then. And eventually one of them sort of bit and said, like, look, do you want to help write a few cues for one of my projects as a ghostwriter? And, you know, within 10 years, he's worked himself up to, you know, he did Travelers for Netflix, and now he's, you know, he's off and running with his career. And it was really great to see that, like, that sort of groundwork, you know, networking that he was doing, like, actually pay off for him, and see his career start that way. So, you know, I always believed in him as a composer, but it was, you know, he was just putting himself in a position to get chances by meeting people. And I think, you know, Zoom calls like this, or meetings like this, are like a perfect way to meet people and then make yourself aware. And hopefully one thing can lead to another, or someone will give you a break somewhere along the way.
I went to the Spark animation we have here in BC, where a lot of animators go to find jobs and stuff. And I was the only composer there, and I came up to the desks for the animation studios and like, oh, where's your rest? And I'm like, oh, I do music. They're looking at me like you're in the wrong event, right? And I'm like, no, I just want to do music for animation. And I worked on that show over there, on that booth with another composer, helping him out for 4 years. And I want to see if I can do my own. And actually that I met Heather Potok from Kickstarter Entertainment there, and she gave me my only gig as an animation. I did a pilot and a few trailers for her. I met her there. Like she's like, oh, this is so interesting. Why is a composer here? And we talked for a few minutes. And she was my first Canadian project. I worked in other animation projects outside Vancouver, but she was the first person who gave me like a chance at a little pilot and some stuff. And I'm still in contact with her, and we hopefully I'll get to work with her in some project. But that's just because I went, and it's very uncomfortable for me and for some people to go and network. But I said, you know, I have to meet somebody, and I didn't think it was going to happen, but I met her, and then a year later, she remembered and she said, let's do this pilot, and she liked hopefully everything, and I got paid my first Canadian show. So maybe those kind of events help for networking.
And this might be the last question, unless anyone else has one. Would you say extensive knowledge in music theory is important or essential for your respective jobs?
I'd say that it definitely helps to have that. And if while you're young and your brain is fresh and able to acquire that information, you commit yourself, it's going to be a lot easier than learning it afterwards. Even though there are also lots of apps and ways that you can operate without it, the broader your skill base, the more opportunities you're going to have.
I agree. It does help a lot, especially when you get into projects where you're required to input a little bit of more orchestration in there and work with instruments and kind of, it does help, I think. So
yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
I would agree. Seeing the composers I work with and the way they work, having a solid background in theory and music is all. I can't really imagine how they would do it otherwise. So I think to get to the highest levels you want, it's something you should have in your toolkit for sure.
Even though I didn't go down the composition route because I wanted to be a band teacher, I played every single instrument I could going through elementary school and high school. And for the young budding composers, I know I mentioned guitar and piano, but if you've got the time and the space and someone to poke at, which is your school teacher, ask them, I want to learn this, can you show me? And then when you are working with studio musicians or understanding orchestration and all this sort of stuff, you have a way better knowledge because you actually have that experience in using it. And that speaks volumes over not knowing it. One more question. Is work in the music industry usually consistent and stable, or are you there sometimes, especially at the start, when you struggle to find a project to work on?
I would say if you're looking for stability, then the music industry isn't necessarily the greatest choice. If you're after spontaneity, creativity, and ultimately very broad possibilities, magic can happen. But especially in this current environment with COVID going on and no live performance, things have been minimized somewhat. But don't be discouraged, because there's a lot of great opportunities out there. They just can be a little unpredictable in the way that they arise.
Yeah, I think nowadays you can very differently than when I started. Now you can kind of create a lot of opportunities. You can kind of build your own music library. You can start putting stuff out there. You can record your own albums. You can promote yourself, and then you can pitch some demos, start working with other people, being assistants. And so I think very differently than before. Now you can create your own thing going, and then it can get traction and help you out.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the participants? I just want to give a big thank you. I personally, for me, and I know Kate will probably do the last bit, but personally for me, I get more out of these panels for professional development for me than anything else. The different things that I've done this summer in terms of doing different, being part of different panels, I have met so many different band conductors from around the world, and I was now part of this group called. It was originally Conductor Conversations, but because it was specifically geared toward Asian band directors, it was Convert Asians. So because of that, the representation, I now connect with a lot of different band directors who are like me from around North America. So it speaks volumes just listening in, and even if you're not actively saying anything, just listening in and meeting new faces and getting some names, I think is going to be your key to happiness in the music industry. So thank you for that. Kate, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you everyone for coming to the panel today. I'd like to thank Randart as well for the awesome job moderating, as well as Jane, John, and Marcelo for being our wonderful guests today. This video will be available as soon as possible. I'm aiming at tomorrow morning, so you can rewatch it on our videos page there. I'll be emailing all the students that, hey, it's going to be available. Feel free to watch them. There's been lots of amazing advice and great discussion today, and we really appreciate everyone's time for that today. So on behalf of DigiBC and DigiMusic, thank you everyone, and I hope you have an excellent rest of your day.